Alright, so we are back once again, and today we're going to be focusing on the Holland. Well, we're going to be focusing on the Holland, but we're also going to be touching on more of a general playstyle thing that I thought I would communicate to the wider audience. Just because I think it's something that newer players tend to get in their heads quite a bit, and kind of force them to do really silly things, and forces them to die very, very, very prematurely, especially in DDs, which is something you really don't want to do, because the most influential thing you can do in a DD is basically stay alive. So, with that in mind, we're going to take a little look. We are playing the Holland, but if you look on the enemy team, there's the Summers, a Z46, and a Kitakaze. Now, generally I would never recommend trying to contest a cap, especially in ranked, playing a Holland, and that's not what we're going to do here, because obviously the enemy team does have a Kitakaze, a Z46, and a Summers, and I have a little bit of lag, which doesn't help. But that aside, what that basically means is that if I go in here all gun-ho and charge in like a clown into C and attempt to take this cap, what I'm going to be met with could very potentially be a Kitakaze or a Z46, and well, if you know anything about the Holland, I'm not too fond of taking that trade. Even against the Summers, it's just not worth the risk, especially when you tie in things like the enemy team having a Moskva. It's not going to end all that well for me, irregardless. So, with that in mind, the one thing you don't want to do is try and cap. And this goes against some of the advice I would give usually. Usually I would say, you know, caps should be your main focus, enemy DDs secondary, and then damage last. But in this scenario, just maintaining presence and focusing on things you can do and not on things you can't do should be the main concern here. So with that being said, we're going to skirt around the edges. Again, you can see that C's being capped, and that pretty much signals for the Stalingrad 2 radar. He does pick up the Kitakaze, which means that there's not a hope in hell of me going anywhere near C cap. To tie into that though, is there's not a hope in hell of me even shooting at the Kitakaze, because the amount of damage that ship can churn out relative to me in a very short space of time means that I'd very quickly be on the losing end of any trades that I wanted to engage in. So, the one good thing though we can do in the Holland is we can fire out torpedoes, and we can fire out torpedoes extremely quickly, almost quicker than any other ship in the game, both in terms of reload and actual, you know, speed of the torpedoes, which is a nice benefit. Luckily, Stalingrad was able to get a couple of hits on the Kitakaze, which means that he isn't able to get the cap just yet, and that delays things a little bit, which helps us out overall, because again, we're not going to be contesting the cap, at least not yet, at least not until it's safe to do so. And perhaps I should talk a little bit about what kind of criteria I get, or I need fulfilled until I feel comfortable actually contesting this. Now there's two things you need to consider here. There's two threats. They have the Moskva on the enemy team, which is overlooking C cap with radar, which can be fairly problematic. But you also have the Kitakaze in the cap too, or around the cap, which is probably the bigger threat. If you're playing a DD like the Holland, sure, it isn't the most maneuverable, but even if you're radared and the only ships on the enemy team that are within range of shooting at you are two enemy Montanas and a Moskva, in that scenario you can be fairly safe if you're a fairly competent player of dodging a lot of those shells. So with that being said, the big threat is always the Kitakaze. Now the Kitakaze somehow managed to dodge all those torpedoes, so we aren't even all that successful in that respect either, which means that they do get the cap, which isn't all that much of a concern for now. If the game starts ticking on and things start happening more and more and more, and you know, the points start adding up and the game gets later, say down to like 10 minutes, and there's like 700 points on the enemy team and, you know, like 500 to 600 on our team, that's when you're kind of forced to be much more proactive. But at this point in the game, it pays to be very, very patient and take your time, as we experience a little bit of lag, which seems to be happening a lot more often nowadays, but what can you do really? We do notice the Kitakaze pushing on my, is it the stern? I think it's the stern of the ship. And again, you're not here to 1v1 the Kitakaze. We're not here to even engage on the enemy DDs in this scenario. We are here to focus on the caps and deal damage as a secondary. So we do fire some torpedoes at both the Montanas in the slim hopes that they'll hit. Again, we're pretty sure that we can get at least 1 or 2 hits on this, hopefully set a flooding, hopefully consume a damage con, make it easier for both our Stalingrad and the Ohio to, you know, deal with these ships, which is always nice. Now, the game isn't going perfectly at this point. As you can see, we lost an ally DD on the bottom side. What did we lose? Jutland on the bottom side, which isn't ideal. But again, I'm not too all that concerned, because the worst thing you can probably do in a DD is look at the game state and then panic, especially when it's not all that far gone yet. We have 13 minutes on the clock. The enemy team has 600 points, they have 2 caps, but the difference isn't all that substantial yet to really, you know, make alarm bells start ringing. So with that in mind, we're going to keep shooting torpedoes. Well, this is a bit of a mistake from me. You know, we are aware that the Kitakaze is pushing on that right hand flank and is pushing basically into where I am. So this is a mistake for me. I shouldn't be like drifting over to this side of the map, and I suddenly become very aware of what I'm walking into and very quickly turn away. Now here I was in 2 minds of whether I should shoot or not, and I thought, again, being exposed for 20 seconds to a Kitakaze is not the type of damage I really want to expose myself to. So with that in mind, being undetectable, being a constant threat without maybe even projecting power is something that's much more valuable than taking half your HP down in the hopes of dealing maybe 1 to 2k damage to a Kitakaze. Now, the one thing I will say though is that there becomes a point in the game where the trade-off becomes in your favor, even if you are in a significantly weaker DD. And at this point, with me having about 20k HP and the Kitakaze having about 4 to 5k HP, I'm comfortable enough taking that trade, whereas I will not die and the Kitakaze will. Because it doesn't matter to me at this point if I get dropped down to 1000 HP but the Kitakaze dies, because at that point there's no other ship really on the map that can really spot me and kill me, so to speak. So we were going to push in and take on the Kitakaze in 1v1, but luckily the Stalingrad solved that problem for us very nicely. And what that means now is that we can go full hog into sea and basically, you know, have our way with both these Montanas and even the Moskva to an extent. Again, the radar usually would be a threat if there was like another cruiser here, but having 2 enemy BBs, the threat's not all that substantial, shall we say. At least in my past experience. Again, this is Silver League. I'm pretty sure it's Silver League. And yeah, if there's one thing that you're going to notice between going from Silver League to Gold League, is that the level of play and the level of things you have to be cognizant of is quite substantial. So with that in mind, we are going to push into sea, because again, at this point now though, the points are starting to tick up. They've got 750, we've got about 550, so the pressure is starting to come on. So the quicker we can get this capped and you know, take on both these Montanas and kill them, the better. Now if you notice, I'm immediately stopping once I get into the cap, because you look at the range between myself and the Moskva, 11.9. I'm very cognizant of trying to generate as much range as possible between myself and that Moskva, because the only threat, the only really way I die here is I get radared and I forget to take a detonation flag and get one shot. Not that that's ever happened to me before, but you never know. But with the Moskva, I think reversing, we're pretty fine in this scenario. We're going to get the cap either way, and with a little bit of lag, we should be pretty safe. With that, we get the kill on the Montana. The Moskva's far enough away that I think even with radar, we should be fairly safe. Stalingrad does go down, but again, not all that much concerning at this point, because again, what they need to do is so much more significant than what we need to do at this point, even though, you know, they started off in a winning position. they need to simultaneously cap C and kill at least one of our ships to, you know, have a chance of winning the game at this point. Now here I make a mistake. Turning out in this direction is a pretty substantial mistake. I thought, foolishly, that the Montana wouldn't have a heal up, and so I opened fire, hoping to get, you know, a second kill and finish him off relatively quickly, but as luck would have it, that didn't really happen, and instead I end up taking a hell of a lot of overpens and taking a hell of a lot of damage as a result. We do eventually get the kill on the Montana, but that being said, if I wasn't extra careful earlier in the game to not take all that much damage and basically avoid the Kitakaze, this could have played out very, very differently. But we do get the kill on the Montana, and generally I think that pretty much sums up the game. We do end up doing 97,159 damage. We get one kill, one fire, and a hell of a lot of torpedo hits, which you'd expect on the Holland. But I hope this serves as a little bit of a, you know, a reminder that charging head in a DD into a cap is not something you want to do in all DDs. Sure, it can work in certain circumstances, you know, like the Kitakaze. The Kitakaze there initially played that really well. You know, he knew he was going to beat any DD he come into contact with. He rushed into the cap, got it, and then, you know, what happened. But generally you have to be much or very, very cognizant of the DD you're playing and how that's going to affect the game. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.